Hey everybody, Emmerron here. So, it's been busy. Getting to and from Gen Con and all the stuff in between, it's just been busy. Thankfully, I didn't get sick, unlike some people from Gen Con. Unfortunately, Dice. So he and I spent a lot of time together at the convention, though. It was really cool meeting him in person. We had a blast, honestly. Between him, my friend Garrick, and myself, we got to see a ton of stuff at the convention. Dice and I in particular helped a bunch of the days with running Artelsorian Games' booth and game room. Dice was a GM. I was more, you might call me a salesperson. I will say until the day I die, I just talked about games that I like for like 5 hours at a time, and I had no issue doing that. I truly loved the opportunity to work with the RTG crew, and I am very, very excited to go back next year. I'm hoping that I can do that with my finances being, a little less stable than they were. As a result of being as busy as I have not shaved in some time, so apologies for the beard. It doesn't look particularly good to my eyes. I know some of you in my audience have mentioned before they like the beard, but we'll see. This might not stick around too long beyond this video. Just for all of you who will mourn its passing yet again, know that is probably coming. So let's talk Gen Con. Let's talk a little more in depth about kind of what I did, what I saw. Like I said, I spent a fair chunk of my time there working with RTG. I did get a little less done in the gaming department than I had planned. I didn't get a chance to play Alien because by the time I realized that my game was on the other side of the world, I didn't have nearly enough time to get to it. Day one, we got to the convention center a little late, so I didn't get a chance to play the pirate board game that was there. Ironically, those are the two most expensive tickets I had all weekend, so that just didn't pan out, and that's okay. I will say right now that is okay. I do not feel bad about that. I'm not sad about that. Each time that I missed a game, I got to do something cooler, which I don't know that I could ever say that about any other convention that I've ever been to, where it's like, you miss a panel, you missed the panel, right? Like that was a selling point to going to that convention, at least in part, right? Is like, I wanted to hear what they said, or I wanted to experience whatever that activity was. Gen Con apparently just has this way, there's something in the water there that tells you like, don't worry, man, it's fine. You'll go do something else now. It's going to be just as cool, if not better, and that'll be okay. So day one, let me start day zero actually. So the day I left for Gen Con, the night before, so I stay up all night the night before. And I'd been doing that for most of the week prior to that. I'd been just staying up really, really late, sleeping most of the day, and I became very, very nocturnal. This was not planned. This is just kind of the way that I do things given enough time and given enough things to do. As all of you know, I put out just a ton of videos early on in the month. Because I wanted to have something every day I was at Gen Con. That was a good idea. I do not regret doing that, but it meant I had a lot of work in the couple days I had right before Gen Con, because before that, I went to Final Fantasy Fan Fest in Las Vegas. So those of you who are familiar with the Final Fantasy community or are part of it may already know this. Those of you outside the community, that it was kind of a COVID super spreader event. And I've got to say, I've been uniquely blessed to this point to avoid those. I am vaccinated, thank God, because if I hadn't been vaccinated, I have a full-fledged understanding that I probably would have caught COVID without a shadow of a doubt. I feel like that was almost a given. Just hearing some of the stories coming out of that event, there were a lot, and I mean a lot of people that got COVID. And as luck would have it, after we got back, because of the stuff I had to do and just volume of it, me and my wife didn't spend much time together. And that, as I will foreshadow now, was a good thing. Because the night prior to me flying out, because I had a fairly early morning flight around like 7 a.m., my wife and I were, kind of talking, and she wasn't feeling great. She was sniffly. She was kind of coughing a little bit. So I was keeping my distance because I know I'm about to go off to Gen Con, where I'm going to interact with thousands upon thousands of people. And even if it's just a cold or something, I don't want to get it. I don't want to give anyone else that cold. And I'd been really looking forward to Gen Con for months at this point, right? I planned a lot for it. I've got stickers I'm giving out. All of that, right? And I don't want to jeopardize any of it. So in the days leading up, I'm kind of noticing my wife's doing all of that. And I ask her, I'm like, hey, have you, checked after Gen Con, or not Gen Con, after FanFest, if you maybe are like down with COVID? Because I just had read on Twitter, and this is, again, the night leading into the day where I'm going to fly. Have you checked this? I just read on Twitter that all of these people are getting sick with COVID. They're testing positive. And so my wife is like, no, I haven't. We got some outdated COVID tests here. I could try one of those and see what I get, and we could start there. I said, I would definitely do that. That is a good idea. Highly recommend doing that. Great idea. So she goes and takes the test. And at first, she doesn't see a positive mark on there. It's just a negative mark, like the negative, test mark, whatever. And so, fun fact for those of you out there who don't know this, expired COVID tests can give you a false negative, but if they pop positive, that is a genuine positive. I'm not a doctor, but based on everything I've read and understood, as long as you're getting the test mark and that positive mark, even on an expired test, believe that positive. Believe it. And if you want to double test, like my wife would end up doing here, do so. Because when I went downstairs after this, I'm like, so how did it turn out? And she's like, I don't know. It's saying negative. These are expired though. So I would like to test with a full functioning one. By now it's maybe 1 or 2 in the morning, mind you, right? It is late. And so we are like, okay, well, there is exactly like one place nearby that'll sell stuff this late, right? It's one place open 24 hours that would have COVID tests. So I run out, I get them, I bring them back. We both do one to make sure, that I don't have it. We do it in separate rooms. And so she, as I'm taking it in the room where like she had her original test, and I'm seeing this very faint blue positive line on it. And I'm like, uh-oh, that's not good. I'm like, okay, so you do have this because this is positive before we even got our second round of results back. I'm like, that is positive for sure. And then we test with the fresh ones, confirms her positive diagnosis. I am negative. Thank God. So I felt terrible, but I had this plan, right? I've got to go. So I get up, leaving my poor sick wife to fend for herself with COVID here. She is also vaccinated, for the record. So I wasn't worried. I had full confidence she was going to be fine. This is not her first rodeo with it either. So we were familiar enough to be like, okay, like this will probably be okay. We know enough people nearby who, if she needed something, could come and get her. So it wouldn't be the end of the world, right? Or, they could bring stuff to her. So I leave for Gen Con. So this is all right before Gen Con. So lots of drama the night before. I'm making sure I've got my bags with everything I need in them, notebooks and stuff. One of them right here, which we'll talk about in a bit. And, we do all that the night before. And then my flight gets, well, not my flight itself, but the connecting flight that I was going to take into Indiana gets delayed, to the point that I would miss my connection. And so I'm like, oh, well, that's not good. So I changed flights. My morning flight now leaves an hour later than the previous one did. Mind you, I'm working off of adrenaline in a big way between the COVID diagnosis downstairs now and the fact that, ultimately I'm like trying to make sure I've got everything. It's that pre-flight jitters, right? The pre-travel jitters. You're just like, do I have everything? Is all my clothes what I need? Do I have, my wife suggested bring an extra bag because you will probably buy books while you're there. I did. And I used that bag to come home. So yes, that was absolutely something that I did. So we fly out, we go Newark. So traveling out of Arizona to Newark, to Indiana. And then, we got to Indiana late in the evening. I think it was about like 5 or 6 p.m. when I got there. My friend Garrick, who was going to pick me up from the airport, was a little further out than he should have been at that point. My flight arrived a little early. So I just take an Uber to our hotel and we call it good, right? So we go out, we get dinner, and I was told by someone on the plane who recognized the shirt I was wearing. I was wearing my Gregarious Games shirt from Ready Player One. And he's like, you're going to Gen Con, aren't you? I'm like, yeah, actually I am. It's like, all right, so pro tip to you, I went a couple years ago. You want to get your badge tonight. Go to the convention center tonight, check how late they're open, but do get it tonight if you can. It's going to be in Madhouse in the morning. I say, okay, very cool. I'd never been, right? I had no idea what I was getting myself into. So what this guy with experience is saying sounds good to me. And so I checked the hours. They're open till 2 a.m. that night. And I'm like, that's telling me some things. That is informing me that this guy's probably right. If they're open that late and there are no events going on in the evening, technically the official convention doesn't start till the next day. Yeah, it's probably we should probably do that. So we get some dinner, we go there, we get in this long line, what I thought was a long line, wait about 30 minutes to get our badges, and then and I got my event tickets as well. And then I'm like, okay, cool. We go home, or back to the hotel, and pass out around midnight, 1 a.m., somewhere in there, right? And so I've got a day pack that I brought with me because I'm not bringing my whole travel backpack with me. I'm just going to bring, what I need, right? A couple notebooks, a couple of TTRPG books that I wanted to get signed and things, because I knew Stockholm Cartel was going to be there. So I brought my Morkborg book so they could sign that. But yeah, I had a great time from this point on, right? So the next morning I knew I had a pirate board game. We did not get there in time. That did not happen. And I'm not mad about that. At the time, I was a little disappointed. I was a little sad. I'm like, oh no, that was going to be my first event for the con. That sucks. So we get there maybe 10:15, 10:30. And they inform me we can't refund your ticket. You need to be here half hour before the event starts in order to get it refunded. I'm like, well, that sucks. Okay, cool. So I'm just out $14. That is rough, right? And so I go and I just start walking around, right? I just start wandering, seeing, where things are, and the exhibitor hall is, to say it's large is understatement of the year. It was massive in a way that I was not prepared for. So where I entered was all the trading card game stuff, right? And I knew when I got close to the Lorcana booth because it got really, really packed. It almost absurdly so, right? You were just doing this to get through a crowd, right? Your shoulders tucked in, hands clawed in front of you, I didn't spin my backpack around, but maybe I should have at that time because I was just oh man, we were really packed in here. So get through that packed crowd and get into the wider hall where they got all the tabletop stuff, the stuff that I'm really there for, right? Like, I played card games. I've been kind of out of the scene for a bit now, and it's not looking like that's changing anytime soon, simply for the fact that I don't have the time or money to like invest in that right now and like be active participant. So, push through into the tabletop area and just start looking around, seeing where things are at. My first shift with RTG is until the afternoon. So I, just kind of look around, see where their booth is, kind of check in, say hi to everyone that's there. And so from there, I kind of go out. There's like a side hall there, right? Where it's like a 2-story row of different rooms where they've got all kinds of different companies set up to play games, right? So that they're not squished in this main hall. So I pop out. I find the one for Artel Saurian Games. Because that's where like Dice and I have been texting back and forth, and we're like, oh yeah, let's meet up. I'm here. And so I wander out into the hall. I find the room. We finally meet in person. That was super cool. The first time, like just getting to see someone that online now for months and have gotten to be good friends, like, and just meeting them in the flesh, right? That's awesome. So I get in there about maybe 11:30-ish. So we're chatting for a little bit, and he's like, hey, FYI, I've got a game that I'm running at noon, so I will need to go about that time. I said, oh, which game are you GMing for? Which session? He says, oh, it's the jacket. For those of you who don't know what the jacket is, it is the Edgerunners Mission Kit demo. And it's the one event that I couldn't get a ticket to that I really wanted to play. So I talk to some of the people at the booth there now, and I'm just kind of chatting about the game. And long story short, I find a way to play this game. I'm not going to go too deeply in detail about that, but I find a way to get to play this game that Dice is running, right? So I squeeze in with another team of 4 that are in there, and I sit down. They've already all chosen their roles, so I didn't get to play Netrunner myself because someone else already taken it. I'm like, damn it. All right, well, that was the one I really want to play. But I play MedTech in one of my other campaigns, so I pick up the MedTech sheet. I'm like, let's do this, right? Let's play this. And what I played was very, very fun. I can't, at the direction of RTG, I cannot talk in detail about the Edgerunners stuff. I believe there are other places online where people who are just players at the convention and are not under the same kind of like barring that like I am have talked about it. So you might be able to find some of the information out there for how the weapons and quick hacking and all of that works. Suffice it to say, it felt very snappy, very fun. The roll abilities were very simplified, which is fine, right? Like that works very, very well for the kind of game they were trying to play in this demo. But it was a blast, and I could not have done this if I had made my pirate board game. So this is the first instance of something working out that really like should have been different, right? And I just came to the right place, right time, right circumstances, and we were there, right? We were playing, and I was like, oh, this is so cool. So get up, pick my sheet up and go, and get over to the booth and check in there. Got to meet Lisa Pondsmith in person. She and I had emailed a little bit to coordinate like my role as a volunteer ahead of the convention. So get to meet her, get to meet, I think Mike was at the booth at the time, which that, it's surreal when you first meet someone that you're like, you write the books that I really, really like. You made this game. Holy crap. And so got to shake Mike's hand, got to meet Lisa, got to meet Cody Pondsmith's wife. Very, very cool stuff, right? Across the board. Had a great kind of introduction. And so we talk a little bit about what I'm going to do. And they're basically like, well, if you don't know how to run the cash register, like if you never used Square cash registers before, we'll just put you up on the book tables, essentially. Because the way that this booth is laid out is like, think of a rectangle, right? I'm on the long end of this rectangle where we've got two different tables, right? The table on the left side of things, and this is my left, I know. So the table on the left side of things was all the older books. So a lot of different Cyberpunk 2020 stuff, Castle Falkenstein and Mechton, Teenagers from Outer Space. Like, if you are a classic RTG fan, they had books that you probably, like many people at the convention did, would have looked at nostalgically. There were a ton of people that stopped by that table in particular, and I didn't know anywhere near enough about some of those games to like really sell them. So usually I left it to someone else who did have experience with those to kind of sell people on those that weren't Cyberpunk, right? I knew enough about the Cyberpunk ones to talk those up, but they put me at the RTG table for Red. So all the Cyberpunk Red books they had at the convention, I was like, if you were there and you were talking to someone on Thursday or Saturday or Sunday, you may have talked to me because I was there in the mornings over the weekend and then Thursday afternoon. So if you saw me there, I'm glad you found my channel now. This is what I normally do. This proves I'm not working for RTG. I'm just a volunteer, but I love their system so much, and I was able to talk it up so much, right? And not really doing that like as a, oh wow, let me sell you on this. It's just like, let me share what I know about this and why I think it's a great game. And people were just there to listen, right? They would hear me out and say, wow, this does sound fun. And a lot of them bought books. And it was really fun to be able to talk with people and like just share a love of the game that I just have, right? That's the whole reason I have this channel in the first place. So I just love Cyberpunk and I want to share that with people. And so when all that's said and done, we get to the evening where the exhibitor hall is now closing, and myself and several other RTG members are going over to the game room where they're doing what they call like a cozy chat with RTG. And this is where we all sit down at, like, the rounds, if you've ever been to like, like a fancy dinner or something, round table, about 8 chairs around it. So that's how the gaming rooms were largely set up. And so we just sit down there, all the games are done for the day, and different members of the RTG staff are in the room with us, just chatting, right? So we sit down at a table that is mostly empty, and I'm just like, all right, like, let's see what this is. And they kind of say, yeah, this is just gonna be like a social hour where we're talking and you can ask us questions, whatever. It's really informal QA essentially. And so we sit down at this mostly empty table, other than other participants. Mike Pondsmith and those of you who don't know Dave Ackerman, Dave is the kind of office manager for RTG. Very nice guy. Got to know him pretty well over the weekend. Super, super kind man. Loved having conversations with him. Dave, if you're watching this at any point, I definitely was super lucky to be able to talk with you in the length that I was. You have a lot of really good stories. And next to him sits Mike Pondsmith. So these two are talking about kind of how they got to know each other and like what their relationship within the business is. And Mike was answering our various questions about Cyberpunk. I wasn't taking notes at this event, mostly because I knew probably some of these things, if not all of them, would come up later in the QA. And if there were any of those that I didn't get on the record during the informal chat, that I would probably just ask them myself during the QA session. So we have a great conversation with Dave and Mike, and they were both wonderful to talk to. Mike is a super down-to-earth guy, very, very cool dude to just chat with. And it was really interesting, right? Like, I think this is one of my first times where I've approached a convention or event of any kind where I'm more coming at this from like a media perspective, right? I'm coming at this from like, let me cool my any kind of like starstruck, like, oh, you're the guy, and like, let's just talk with these people like they're people, right? That's all we are in that space, is we're just people talking. And Mike was very like open to that, right? He didn't think of himself, like, in any conversation he had over the weekend that I was there for, he's like, I just wrote some books that people like, like that's all he views himself as. Just, I made a game and people liked the game, and I'm really happy people liked the game. And it's just really, really cool to like just talk to him and hear his thoughts on stuff. So we go from this about an hour, like I said, and then we go upstairs for the broader QA. So I have my notes for that QA here. So let's talk about that. So, oh, whoopsie daisy. What do I have here? Oh my goodness. What is falling out of my... Oh, yeah, this is some other stuff. Never mind. This is game stuff from a different game that I played. All right, very cool. So yeah, let's talk. So this was the general Artelsaurian Games QA. So this is going to cover things that aren't strictly Cyberpunk. This is going to cover some other stuff they've got going on. So I want to go through this with my notes in hand so that all of you, get the full kind of gist of what I heard, and I can report that to you. Some of this has been conveyed in a roundup that RTG themselves posted. And I'll link to that below just in case there are any like more minute details, like the names of authors or artists that are involved with some of these projects, because I couldn't write them fast enough. I'll be honest, because I wasn't recording. I was literally writing this down, transcribing it. So I will preface with that right now. If you don't hear me mention names and things, they're probably in the roundup because they did a very good job capturing those there. But they've got the list. I didn't. So let's go over some things, right? So the panel consisted of James Hutt, Jay Gray, Mike Pondsmith, Cody Pondsmith, and Dave Ackerman. So we've got, James Hutt, who many of you know as Mayor of Balancetown. He did a ton of the balance work on Cyberpunk Red. And he's going to be involved in some other projects we'll talk about here soon. Jay Gray, who is the social media guy, if you're on the RTG Discord at all, he is very active on there, moderating things, and he is also the Cyberpunk Red kind of lead guy. He's the what they call line manager for that, so he handles everything related to Cyberpunk at kind of the top of that organizational structure for the line itself. Mike Pondsmith probably needs no introduction, but the writer of Cyberpunk Red and the guy running pretty much the whole company from the top. Cody Pondsmith, Mike's son, who also, along with Lisa Pondsmith, Mike's wife, wrote the Witcher RPG, and is kind of involved with all of that. And then we got Dave Ackerman, who is the general manager of Artelsaurian Games, and is, kind of Mike's right-hand man, was kind of the sense I got. Obviously, if any of that is inaccurate and any of you folks from RTG are watching, please feel free to correct me. I am not infallible, but and I would love to hear your input. So they first covered like more general plans for like the broad, the broader kind of perspective of things. So it started with the plans for Cyberpunk in particular. So we've got Jay going over the current releases that are available right now. So as of the time of this recording, those would be obviously the core rulebook, Black Chrome, Tales from the Red, or Tales of the Red, excuse me. Tales of the Red Street Stories specifically, and that's going to be an important distinction. Danger Gal Dossier as of the start of Gen Con, and that's it for like their major releases. Obviously, there's some minor ones too, like the data pack and all of that, but didn't really talk much about that. Again, this is just like a quick summary of like what's out there already, so that they can illustrate what's coming out after. So the one thing they mention is that Danger Gal is going to have some tie-ins to 2077. So for those of you who don't already have it, this is the book. I got my copy at Gen Con. I did get Mike Pondsmith to sign it for me. I am very happy about this. So this is an NPC and faction guide. It's got 100 new NPCs. It's got a mission in the back. It's got rules for writing your own NPCs. Very, very cool book. I'm already loving it, and I'm only about halfway through the NPCs themselves. But I will be using these guys at some point in the future, if in stat block, if not in name, right? So we've got all of that. And Danger Gal is slated to appear in some way, tie into 2077, which is very cool. I've already said, and they kind of illustrate maybe why this is later, but I've always said that Red has far too few tie-ins to 2077. It feels right now there's a lot more tied to 2020 there, right? And that kind of makes sense because it sounds like Red was kind of developed alongside the game. So making those tie-ins probably involved a little more communication and work. So we'll see what Phantom Liberty has to offer, but more Red tie-ins are always a good thing in my book. So we got Danger Gal confirmed as they're going to do something with them in 2077. The Edgerunner mission kit will feature Trigger art. So Studio Trigger, the anime studio, has art all over. So if they need an original art piece, like whether that's for a character portrait or the books themselves or the box art or whatever, Studio Trigger are the ones making that new art, right? And I did hear a little bit that they're planning on using like Studio Trigger, like just scenes from the show as part of it as well. But Studio Trigger is doing all of the original artwork that they need for this. Very cool. We got some of that, or at least the rough like design sketches of that in the Edgerunners sheets that we played with in the demo for the jacket. So that was very cool. Had a blast with that. We got the announcement for Tales of the Red Forlorn Hope, which is to cover what happens to it in 2045. It is going to be a full campaign. So where Street Stories was more loose, you could run it as a campaign or you could run it as like single shot adventures. Forlorn Hope is going to be a full end-to-end cohesive through line kind of story, right? So if you start running it, you're probably going to run it all the way through. Jay did mention that there are going to be breaks in between some of the action where if you did have some original story that you wanted to lace in there, or some like personal stuff that you wanted life path wise to like be impacting the story and your players and all of that, there was room for that to get inserted. But that when you came back to the Forlorn Hope story, there was like an advancement, a consistent advancement of a singular storyline, instead of there being like a fixer a week like we have in Street Stories. So very cool. And they talked a little bit about how in the time of 2077, we don't know where the Forlorn Hope is. They brought up some commentary around like, well, what happens, when they talked with CDPR, and they're like, well, we can put it wherever, like it can be another victim like the Afterlife or Totentons of, things getting shuffled off into the bay, the gradual progression of the city and its reconstruction, all of that. So Interface Red Volume 3 will also be out by year end, or at least is expected to be. They didn't give like a hard release date or anything, but it's a compilation with an extra article. And they mentioned that whatever that extra article is for this interface, they were very excited for players to see it. They didn't give any hints beyond that. They also mentioned that figures for the Edgerunners mission kit, when that does come out, because it's going to be a full box set, that they will, not in the box itself, but they will release Monster Fight Club miniatures for the kit. So any new characters that are introduced as part of the kit will have figures introduced from Monster Fight Club when it comes out. By the way, anything that exists in Danger Gal Dossier, this also has miniatures for Monster Fight Club. So if you do play at a physical table, I know I usually play at a digital one, more or less. But if you do play a physical one, this is going to have stats for minis that Monster Fight Club does produce. So that was all they talked about in this one about Cyberpunk. We then went to The Witcher. So they talked about how over the last few years, they have worked very close with CDPR to enable consistency of the universe, but that this has led to work bottlenecks over time. Largely right now, Witcher as an RPG is on hold while CDPR develops Witcher 4. The next product will be backed by the weight of lore meetings that zoom down to a minute level. They're now operating on a video game company timescale, which is what Cody was kind of talking about. Is that now they're working at the pace of a video game production, not the normal pace of like a TTRPG production, which like TTRPGs can move pretty quick depending on like the supplements you're creating and stuff. But because The Witcher 4 is kind of in development right now, and it sounds like there's some stuff that might shift around there. Right now, the RTG's gotta wait for CD Projekt Red to do what they're gonna do. And like get back to them on like, okay, you can continue releasing. So right now, Witcher kind of on hiatus, not gone by any means, not going anywhere. Cody even mentioned I have a bunch of stuff that I want to release, but I need the final edit pass to be influenced by the stuff that CD Projekt Red is doing right now. And without doing that, I can't release these. So we're just going to wait and see on that. But it sounds like there's plenty in the pipeline, and the pipeline's just bottlenecked at the moment. So from this point on, they started talking with James Hutt, and the fact that James Hutt now is going to be a line manager for a new line of games, which is very exciting. So those of you familiar with Free League Publishing will probably know they've got their mainline, Free League Publishing, and then they've got Free League Workshop, which is like a smaller scale project, like the indie projects. Stockholm Cartel has their stuff, I believe, published under Workshop. So it's a way for like indie devs to get out there and make a tabletop game and produce something, right? So that they have a publisher backing them, but they're usually smaller scale projects. So RTG is entering that space now. James Hutt will be the one leading it. Their line is going to be called 5 by Infinity. They are, kind of conveniently 5 by 8 books, right? That's where that infinity is just the 8 turned sideways. So 5 by Infinity is going to be a new line focused on 5-inch by 8-inch books. The first game they announced is going to be Fossilized Violence, and they described it as a game that uses those old little rubber dinosaur toys that we had as kids. They even had a bowl of these over at the RTG booth, and that afternoon while I was working there, I was like, what the heck is this? So they talked a little bit about Fossilized Violence and like the fact that it's going to be like a, like a fighting kind of game, and there were going to be stats and things like that for these dinosaurs, and they were going to use these little rubber dinosaur toys as like figures on the battle maps and stuff. So that was a cool little announcement, and it sounds like this is going to be a wider line of more indie work that are all 5 by 8 format books, which really, really cool. I love those already, like what I've read of Stockholm Cartel stuff, and like Death in Space, Cyborg, Morkborg, Limithron released Pirate Borg. All of those are 5 by 8 style books, and all of them was, really cool. They've got a nice charm to them. They're easy to put in a bag too. So like if you want a game on the go or bring stuff to play a pop-up game, if you've got a bunch of friends who are TTRPG nerds like I do, those are always really convenient. So I'm really excited to see RTG entering that space personally. We have an unnamed system right now. The name that we've been given is Project Blue Moon. Those of you who have not been to my Discord, I have a link to the landing page that they gave us on cards back at Gen Con. They gave us little silver QR cards. I'll put a picture up here in editing if I can find mine from the convention. A lot of stuff's gotten moved around, but I think I still have mine. It's a very cool little project that they're kind of like being really like, ooh, mysticism, like, but all we know right now is it's a Shinto gate on a silver backing, and they were giving little dice away that are tied in, little blue like glitter dice that are tied into the game somehow. And they were giving those away as like one per purchase at Gen Con, right? Cody Pondsmith is going to be lead on this, and it's going to be focused on being cinematic and easy to run. So they are leaning into that rules light space a little bit. Maybe that's been opened up by companies like Free League. Again, I kind of see some crossover here where maybe they've taken some inspiration from that. If I'd love to ask them that. That's something I didn't think to ask them at the time. But like thinking about it now in the week or two that I've had since Gen Con to like, you know, ponder on it, it really seems like they're taking a lead from some of this push that companies like Free League are doing in the rules light space and like trying to run with that. So I'll be interested to kind of see what this develops into. As of right now, we're going to be getting more details for this on August 31st when that update goes live. So that's going to be really, really cool. So this was kind of just their general announcements portion. That's where that cuts. Now we get into the actual QA for the general RTG stuff. So the first question was, and again, some of these are going to be paraphrased, not exactly, but so the first one was, where's Mech-Ton at? You know, what's going on with that IP? And so Mike said essentially that the game, including DICE, is done for the next installment, which they had kickstarted a while back and then refunded everybody. So it sounds like they did get the premise of this done and like got enough done that they have stuff, physical stuff, loaded up in a warehouse, ready to go. But he needed time that he didn't have to finish it, right? And like get it edited and everything. And so it had taken a backseat to finalizing Cyberpunk 2077 and Red and all of that, right? All those negotiations with CDPR largely put this on the back burner, and that's why he refunded everyone, because he wasn't sure he'd be able to deliver on the timescale that the Kickstarter had, you know, kind of given. And so due to Jay Gray taking up the Cyberpunk line, he started work on this again now. The new game will use robots in everyday life, described so this is me just reading directly, but he directly described a scene where a housewife was in a mech with groceries and screaming kids in the back getting a ticket from a cop. So he wanted these mechs to be that kind of everyday, like, I have a daily driver mech that I get to and from the supermarket with. It sounded really like cutesy and kind of funny, but it still sounded like it had some of that mecha flair for those people familiar with Mech-Ton. I haven't looked into it too deeply. This made me want to look into it more, so like I may do that in the future here. So the next thing here, so what is going on with current content in Witcher as it relates to DLCs? And so the short version of the answer was, design pipeline is currently owned by CDPR. We're waiting on them to get back to us with, you know, updated spec, whatever, on what they're going to do. And then once they know what they're doing, we will have direction to continue what we are doing. They did mention printing updated stats in the future printings of the core books that more mimic some of the later DLCs like Book of Tales. So that way they were more readable. So that's something that, you know, they talked about maybe being able to do in the intermediate time, just as like a simplified thing to help with stuff. Then there was a question about how do you handle handing ownership to someone of a property? And this was directed at Mike regarding handing Cyberpunk over to CDPR, essentially. And Mike said that they lucked out working with fans. They had meetings about how the world worked, allowed them to design accurately. So they were going to, you know, not do it in injustice, right? They already knew enough of the source material, and they were bringing up things that Mike was not worried about, you know, their handling of the lore. The lore was not something that he had to worry about. He was talking with them more about technical constraints. It actually sounded like back when they first had meetings. For those of you who don't know, Mike has a history apparently in game development. So he actually had unique insight into what they were doing. So while they were not tabletop RPG designers and Mike was not, you know, strictly a video game designer, they had enough interplay knowledge between, CDPR knew the world and Mike knew enough about a dev pipeline to really talk in like a fruitful way. So he emphasized like that has been one of like the crowning achievements of their partnership, is like the fact that they both get what the other needs to do, and there's no confusion across that board of like what needs to, happen. He even added, and I don't think there was a question on this one talking about it. Yeah, no. So one of the other little addendums that I remember them talking about is Mike had brought up, and I don't remember if it was during this panel or if it was the cozy chat before, but someone asked him a question about like, did it disappoint you, the state that 2077 released in? And he's like, like I saw it come out and saw all the bugs, and I didn't mind actually at all. I was not up in arms. Like the whole internet's saying, oh man, Mike's going to be so disappointed or upset or whatever, that like this is his baby, right? This is his world. And what have you done to my boy was kind of the meme, right? And Mike is looking at this. He's like, oh, they've never released a game before. And like, not to CDPR, but the fans who were saying, oh, he must be so disappointed, is like the people saying that have no idea what releasing a game is like. Because when I looked at it, I'm like, yeah, there's some bugs. They're passable. They're funny, right? Like it was normal for him. He looked at that and was like, yeah, this is kind of normal. Like the console releases were a different story. He didn't really talk on that specifically. But I think more about the PC release, he was definitely talking like, oh, you've never shipped a game before. Like the things that were happening early on were not entirely unforeseeable, and they weren't that bad. But obviously, like the console release was different. So they talked about how that partnership is really good because both understand what the other needs to do in a limited fashion, so they can have more productive conversations when they do have them about what's going to happen next, how it's going to be implemented, all of that. And then they talked about how Cody pitched The Witcher, because that was, kind of in the middle of this time frame of 2077 happening. So he talked about, he met with these execs in a like conference room in a La Quinta Inn, gave them all of the source books, and said that they could take it as inspiration. And so basically, he like presented this at a La Quinta, and they're like, yep, we love it, make it. And so she's like, okay, like sounds good. And so I got to hear a little bit about that story too over the weekend, where like he pitched this when he was like 18, right? Like he was young by anyone's imagining to make a tabletop game based on a franchise as large and successful as The Witcher. So like I'm impressed. I've started playing the game recently. It's a very well made game. Like that's insane that like in essence an 18-year-old and his mom were responsible for like making that happen, right? That's really, really cool. And so Mike talked a little bit about like what he's given CDPR to work with. And he told a story where right now the plan is to kind of line up on both sides where the timeline goes, because he hasn't thought through how we get from 2045 to the 2060s, which is where CDPR kind of picks up the timeline and starts running it through the games. And so he says, like he had a conversation about, what do I do with locations, all of this. He told CDPR they don't get Morgan Blackhand. He has plans for him. So that's really cool to hear. But also, CDPR told him back, like, don't touch Antarctica as you expand your world. We have plans for it. Or not maybe we have plans for it, but just don't touch Antarctica. And so Mike is like, what do you mean your plans for Antarctica? Like, what do you mean don't touch it? And they're like, just don't touch Antarctica. So CDPR might have plans for Antarctica. All right. Mike also talked about being able to be a radio host in 2077 rather than being Dexter Deshawn. So he mentioned how originally he was going to play Dexter Deshawn in the opening lead up to the Konpeki heist. And he had all the lines recorded. Everything was good to go on that front. And then for some reason, essentially, they didn't either he didn't want to do that anymore, or thought he could fit better in a different role, or like CDPR was like, hey, we want to do something else. And so they made the role for him to be the radio host that he later would become in the game. And he says, it was really good because I get to talk about the wild ideas I have for the world, right? Without being tied down to how accurate these things are, right? I'm not guaranteeing that this is gonna happen when I talk about a thing on the radio, but as a conspiracy theorist, I can talk about more or less anything, right? And so they're the wild ideas of the guy who made the game. And so basically the concepts don't need to be immune to revisions. They just need to be concepts. And then if revisions happen, that's just the, well, there was a grain of truth in what the conspirator was saying, right? Like in terms of what Mike has said on the radio, no big deal. Like he's talking conspiracy. The reality is maybe a little different, but hey, that's conspiracy theory for you. They also talked about how the logos of various corporations like Militech, Arasaka, etc. in the old books, were the product of one night on a Mac, like an old Mac. And he's like, yeah, it's weird walking around the world now, seeing those logos up on like billboards and posters and stuff. And if I knew back then what I know now, we would have spent a little more time designing those than what we did. And I'm like, they're very good logos in my opinion, at least, right? Like for the old like Militech and Arasaka and Biotechnica, they've got that like 80s 90s flair, and they work, right? It's really funny to hear him talk about that and being like, yeah, we would have spent more time on that if we had the opportunity. So all that kind of branched off the question of how do you handle giving your baby over to someone else. So the next question that was asked is, what is the status of the next weapon book for Cyberpunk Red? And Jay Gray responded that they're still trying to figure out how to do art efficiently for another gear book. They were talking about like cards that maybe gave weapon variants, and that they might do like a deck of like weapon variants based on stuff that already exists in the game. And that old school line art might be an idea as well. Something Jay brought up is that they blew the budget for, I think it was like 3 or 4 books on Black Chrome because of all of the art that they had to commission for that book. So he said, yeah, like we learned some things, like how much art really costs. And so we want to do another, but we want the quality to be what it was in that book, right? We've set a bar for ourselves, and that bar is pretty high. It's pretty expensive. So we need to figure out how to do that more efficiently in the future because of how much this costs. And so they're talking some alternatives that might give players like some additional variants and stuff to use, along with some shortcuts that might cut down some of the price of that artwork to make it less of a problem. But yeah, that's kind of where we are with that. So no real status update on that as of yet, but it's interesting nonetheless. And then someone else asked about cyberpunk fiction, like books and such, which are now all handled by CDPR. So CDPR is the ones in charge of that. RTG has no plans or any of their previous works. Dead in the water. They won't be doing any more of that. So that was everything for the general RTG Q&A. Unsurprisingly, most of the questions were about Cyberpunk. It is kind of their largest IP, so makes sense. So now, fast forward a day. This was the day where I got to wander around the hall a little bit. I got to play Dragonbane this day. I bought the box set. I will have a review up on the channel soon about that. I had so much fun. I played under a wonderful GM whose name escapes me right now. I'm still waiting for him. He has all my contact information, so I'm waiting for him. If you see this video, please reach out to me. I really would love to get a chance to play another game with you. He was a wonderful older man who, like, one of the things about Gen Con, real quick, to just take a break from the QA stuff, there was such a diversity of people there. And I mean that in terms of like ages, in terms of backgrounds. There were cosplayers, there were just regular people, and there was everyone. I think the youngest I saw were like literally kids that came up to my legs, and the oldest were like in their late 80s or early 90s, just by appearances alone. So very diverse, right? And several of the games I played, I was one of the younger guys at the table, if not the youngest, right? So it was quite an experience. And Dragonbane was one of those where there was maybe one other guy at the table there who was like my age, and everyone else was a bit older than I am. And I'm 30, so like that was kind of surprising to me. I'm like, oh, I'm probably gonna run into some other people in their like 20s or teens or whatever. Nope, not in the games I was playing apparently. So that was cool. So this guy ran Dragonbane, had like the best like narrator voice that I've heard in a long time for this, and like really leaned into the atmosphere of like, we played through Rittermound, so those of you who played Dragonbane will know the adventure. I won't spoil it for those of you who haven't played yet. I recommend it highly. But yeah, Rittermound was incredible. I played a elf huntress, had a blast, right? So we had a lot of fun. So after that was all done, I find my way over to the booth, hang out there for a little bit, and then head back upstairs and we do the Cyberpunk Q&A. So this was specifically for the Cyberpunk side of things. So the information in the front of this one was that, you know, Combat Zone and Danger Gal are compatible. Like I said, if you have figures for Combat Zone, they have stats in the Danger Gal book. And Combat Zone is like their little skirmish game that Monster Fight Club makes. So if you're a fan of like small scale skirmish games like Necromunda for Warhammer 40k, this is kind of an answer to that in the Cyberpunk universe. So they're developing combat action dice, which are going to be something that like you can roll kind of actions and stuff, and that's going to be like a new feature within the game. Prototypes are going to be coming out soon for that. The Edge Runner mission kit will not just be a world and rulebook like the Jumpstart kit was, but will have a full suite of rules for using the weapons in full red games. So if you like the weapons of the 2077 era and want to port those back to your red game in 2045, or, you know, have some way to like implement those special rules, or at least the ones you like, you'll be able to do that with the mission kit. Like, this will be a thing that let you go through and do that. The box is planned to include dice, a world book, a mission book, character sheets, standees with arts by Trigger, and then obviously those rules are either going to be part of that or a book of their own. So full box set, similar to the Jumpstart kit. So it's somewhat of an introductory box, it kind of sounds like, and that is kind of cool. The Jumpstart kit, as we have it right now, is not accurate to the current rules without finding their DLC that converts it. So that is a little problematic for that product kind of existing. Something notable is that it wasn't on any of their like product listing catalog things. So actually I've got one right here. I can show it for the camera real quick. Or no, I don't. I lied. I lie as easy as I breathe. I'm so sorry. Yeah, I lie as easy as I breathe. I have this flyer, which was for the mission kit. So this is going to kind of like run down what it is. I might scan this and put it up on my Discord later so y'all can read it. But they had another one where they were kind of going over, these are the products we currently offer. And that was at the booth all weekend, and the Jumpstart kit notably was absent from it. So I think they know, like, hey, this is outdated. Hey, this won't work as like an intro product. if we want people to actually play our game with the rules now. And it kind of sounds like there are plans in the works potentially to update that, just kind of based on some of the rumors I've heard. So that's speculation. That is not backed by anything more than rumor and speculation. But it's worth noting that they do have an intro product here in the Edgerunner kit, and so it would follow in my mind that they probably are planning on updating something with the Jumpstart kit as well, if this is not that update itself. So they also mentioned, the Forlorn Hope again, the new Tales of the Red Book, and that's going to be a full campaign start to finish, and it involves connecting characters with a focus on role play. So there will be some decision making to be done, which is very cool. It sounds like we'll be able to influence some things when it comes to the Forlorn Hope through what they were talking about in the mission. So that's very, very cool. And then they listed off all of the artists and writers working on it. That'll be on the website. That's really the one part that I've really had a hard time writing all the people. There's a lot of them involved with it. So I definitely recommend, again, checking that link below if you have an interest in who's all going to be working on it. Several of them are people that have worked on some of the other books that they've released so far. So there's a lot of really good information there. It's being closely developed with CDPR. They're also, again, kind of picking apart what happens between 2045 and 2060, where they pick up the story. They're working on DLC for the Interface Red Volume 3, which they've said that they'll talk about that more online. So we may hear more about that in the near future. So now that was kind of the information. So they kind of recapped and maybe give a couple more details about what they talked about the night previous. So they say, so the next part is questions, right? Questions, answers. So the first question was, is having a North American CDPR studio making things easier? And so they mentioned that one is in Boston, one is in Vancouver. Both of those are much closer than Poland, which is where Mike has had to go for any in-person meetings he's had to do up till now. So very cool. That will help kind of speed some things along. The next question is, when creating timelines, you focus on what could go wrong. So this is specifically directed at Mike, Mr. Pondsmith, you have plenty of thought on the timeline and what goes wrong, and that seems to come true more often than not. Have you ever thought about what might go right? And I laughed so hard at this because I'm I've talked a little about it, I think, on the channel, but Mike has done some pretty scary prediction that's been more on point than off, and yeah, it's kind of spooky at times to see how close the line got right to reality here. So his answer was kind of lighthearted, and he's my son and my wife have been asking me this for a while. Couldn't you focus on the good stuff? So it sounded just kind of it was an answer, but not really. It was just kind of yeah, obviously some things have been right, some things have been wrong, but I think, and this is my personal speculation, it just comes down to paying attention, right? From the way Mike has talked about the game and talked about the ways he's made it and written it, he pays attention, right? The whole team there that is writing this stuff pays attention to what's happening in the world. They pay attention to the trends of the world. And when you listen long enough, you start seeing the path, right? You start seeing what might come up and what might happen. So they're just getting that right. They're hearing the echo of what's coming, and they're I think I know what's coming. And they're more right than they are wrong. So, can't fault them for that. They're just smart. They're listening to the right stuff. So the next question was, is the Elvis religion still in 2045? So this was something I was unaware of, but apparently in 2020 somewhere there is a lore on a church or cult of some kind that worships Elvis Presley as a god, and the answer to this was that there's more to come, but that they do exist, and their head priest is a Thalos nomad, which are the sea nomads that I've used in Neon Inferno. So that's very interesting. I was fascinated by that because I was like, what do you mean there's an Elvis Presley religion? That's insane. And so the next question was, do you take real events and add them to the game? And the kind of response to this, and my page is not flipping too well. There we go. So Mike, and so this speaks a little more to that previous question about like, have you ever thought about good things? And Mike says, I do a lot of research into how things work and use that to inform my design. Example was given on the psychology of replacing appendages with cyberware. So like he studied and talked with psychologists that he knew, like what would happen if I chopped my arm off and replaced it with like a robotic appendage. And like a lot of those conversations were the foundation of how he talked about cyberpsychosis and like what that would look like. So a lot of it is just based on being informed about the way that it works from people who know their stuff, right? And like talking and having conversations about those people. And he says that he's talked before about how cyberpsychosis is more apparent in people who lack empathy because they don't view their meat, so in other words, the flesh and bone arms or appendages that they have, as being part of them. They view the self and the body as two very different things. And as a result, that empathy is lacking, and adding metal onto that meat is a just, I am whatever, you know? And so it reduces their regard for that in other people, because they see these other people and they're like, well, that's just meat being piloted by a person. It's a thing, right? The meat is a thing. The meat is not the person. Meanwhile, if the meat fails, the person dies, right? So like people who are more empathetic are going to relate a little more with that second part of that than the ones who are not, right? So it was really interesting, really cool answer. Really loved kind of hearing that response to things. And so someone again asked, you know, Cyberpunk has grown quite a bit. What's it like handing it over to CDPR? So this was again a kind of an echo of the previous night's question. And actually it's funny, Garrick asked him this in the Comfy chat before either of these QAs took place as well. And so, you know, he said, by luck worked in games. They knew about the world like I did. Both of us respected each other and what we did and contributed. The product that came out and matched what was in my mind, it's less like I gave it over and more like I became part of their team. So it's, you know, again, more like I work with a team now. I don't, you know, it's not like I gave it up completely, which is really cool. So someone then asked, Night City is great, but what about the other places in the world? And Mike said, we are limited in what we can talk about. We're making, we're working on bridging the gap with CDPR. They're looking at locales more generally than granularly. So in other words, when they're looking at like, you know, Europe or South America or, you know, these other places in the world, Asia, all of that, they're not looking down to like, what's life like in Rome in 2045? They're looking at, you know, what is the general life of like random people living in this place, or the events kind of broadly happening there, not like specific in-city stuff. That has always kind of been the regime of players and GMs anyway. That's not really for them to decide. But that they're looking at, you know, bridging the gap, and that those locales are being more general than granular. The details are around supply and transport. AI help the world be not post-Holocaust. So that was really important. Red is always described by them as not being post-Holocaust, but being like it's rebuilding, right? And the AI that were developed before the war and implanted in some of these things are the reason why the world is not in a worse state, right? Because you've got boats just drifting around doing circles out in the middle of the ocean. They're just waiting for someone to go pick the stuff up. So the stuff's out there, it just needs to be found, right? And so it just needs, it's in need of discovery. The world is tied by black markets. All of these are informing our choices. So all of those kind of topics where locales are more general than granular, and that the world is just waiting to be rediscovered essentially, and the stuff that is part of that is being rediscovered by nomads and edge runners and all of that. CDPR has just asked us to leave Antarctica alone, which is the thing I talked about before. So I talked about, don't touch Antarctica. Why? We have no idea yet. And so the last question I had from this is, are there topics you want to cover in red that you haven't yet? And he's mentioned that this is largely where our DLCs on the website come from. If we have an idea that doesn't fit in a book, we make it into a DLC. Elf Lines was originally a JRPG in 2020. ELO is just the MMO. So in other words, Elf Lines was created, the online version was created off something Mike created. So James just took the inspiration and ran with it. And a little side note, a little bit of enhancement. When I talked with James a little one-on-one, he mentioned that Elf Lines Online was his old man screams at cloud, version of his experience with MMOs. So the idea that you stupid youngins don't know what our suffering and struggle was like. That was James Hutt, doing that with an MMO. Fun additional fact that my table wanted to ask him. So those of you who have played Neon Inferno know we did an Elf Lines episode and were there for it, might remember a question getting asked, what's the most, debauchery infested town in all of ELO? And it's, James Hutt said, I have a Booty Bay equivalent that I put in there. It's Treasure Hold or something like that, or Treasure Bay, I think. It's in the DLC for the Guide to ELO. So if you look at it and you see the treasure place, that is the most debased place in the whole game. You're welcome. GMs out there, you can thank me later. But yeah, so that's kind of the information I have accrued from Gen Con that I wanted to share. Other than that, like I said, spent a lot of time hanging out with the RTG crew, a lot of time hanging out with Dice, got a chance to walk around the hall, got to see Cody Pondsmith try to be sold Dice for the game he made without the guy realizing that was what he was doing. So that was really funny. But it was just a blast. I would highly recommend anyone who is interested in tabletop, go check out Gen Con. If you have the means to, and you have the money, and you have the time, do it. It is so very cool. It was so rewarding getting to be there and to feel like I was part of the RTG team. They had us, join them for team photos and stuff. When Dice and I were in the room, they were like, you're part of the team, come on. So it was really cool. We got to feel like part of the family over there, and it was really neat working with them. So to any of you from Artel Soaring Games, Jay Gray, or any of the rest of you, because Jay, I know, has specifically mentioned he's seen some of my videos. So any of you who may be watching, again, I want to thank you so much for including me and Dice as well in everything over the weekend. I could not be more appreciative of the opportunity and the experience I got from all of you. I want to be back there with all of you next year. I want nothing more than that to be, the way things happen. So I will absolutely be in touch when the announcements go up, and I would love to help again in whatever way I can, potentially GMing this time if I can have my way, but I would be happy to even just work the booth again. It was such a blast. So, but yeah, for everyone else, that's going to be it. Again, I want to thank my August patrons, which I will show in a card just after this, before my end card, for making it possible for me to make videos. Again, I appreciate all of your support so much. If you'd like to become a patron, the link is down below where you can join my Patreon. The lowest tier is $3 a month, which will give you a thank you in videos like this. $5 will give you the videos a day early, like my patrons will have for this one. So I would highly encourage you to check it out and support what I do here to let me make more awesome videos for all of you. So, but with that said, that's going to be it for today's video. I hope you all have a wonderful morning, evening, or afternoon, wherever you are in the world. I hope you stay healthy, stay safe, and until next time, peace. Thank you to all my patrons for the month of August. Your support makes doing what I do easier and allows me to do more with the time that I have. Thank you all so much. If you would like to support me in what I do, please join these fine people by following the link in the description below.